Okay. So we all love a good laugh, right? But where's the line? Where does comedy cross over and become offensive?
It's a great question.
Well, that's exactly what we're going to be looking at today.
Yeah.
It all started with some controversy
Oh, yeah.
involving these two pretty popular Indian YouTubers.
Okay.
Ranveer Allahbadia, you probably know as Beer Biceps,
Yeah.
and Samay Raina,
Right.
who's the host of this comedy show, India's Got Latent.
Okay, interesting.
So for those who might not be familiar with these two guys, Ranveer is, kind of known for his motivational content,
Right.
fitness, all that good stuff.
Okay.
And then you've got Samay, who's all about comedy,
Yeah.
especially in like the online chess world. So his show, India's Got Latent, is basically like a roast, but lighthearted, of contestants' hidden talents.
Ah, so they're like making fun of them in a
Yeah, in a fun way.
a lighthearted
With
way.
a panel of guests, usually. So you can imagine how surprised everyone was when Ranveer, who was a guest on the show, asked a contestant a question that was...
Oh, I see. So he was a guest.
Yeah, and the question was, well, let's just say it was sexually explicit.
Oh.
And definitely not what anybody was expecting.
So it was a little out of line.
Yeah. It wasn't just a little risque.
Yeah.
It's one of those questions that kind of makes you,
Makes you cringe.
makes you cringe.
Yeah.
And immediately wonder, like, did they go too far? And the reaction online was pretty explosive.
Oh, yeah.
People were outraged. They wanted both Ranveer and Samay held accountable for it.
I see.
It wasn't just a few comments here and there.
Right.
It blew up into a huge controversy.
Full blown.
Yeah, full-blown. It went viral.
Wow.
And it even caught the attention of the authorities.
Oh, really? Okay.
So it went from like a social media storm to legal action pretty quickly.
Wow.
FIRs, those first information reports?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those were filed against Ranveer, Samay, and a number of other guests who were on the show.
Right.
And these were filed in Assam and Maharashtra.
So in multiple places.
Yeah, this wasn't just a small thing.
Wow.
This was serious legal stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the charges themselves, like promoting obscenity,
Okay.
engaging in vulgar and sexually explicit discussions, and broadcasting indecent content.
That's a lot.
Yeah, and we're talking about potential violations of, like, the Indian Penal Code,
Oh, wow.
the IT Act, which have some pretty strong provisions
I see. So like
relating to these types of offenses.
real consequences.
Yeah, so potentially fines, imprisonment,
Wow.
the whole 9 yards.
So this is way beyond just like a joke that missed the mark.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It brings up the question of, like, okay, what are the legal consequences for online content that crosses boundaries?
Yeah. It's really interesting because it seems like the lines are being blurred
Right.
between online and offline
Exactly.
when it comes to like legal accountability.
Yeah, and it wasn't just the FIRs.
Right.
The National Commission for Women took notice, too.
Oh, wow.
And they summoned Ranveer, Samay, and those other guests for a hearing.
Okay.
And even the Mumbai police got involved.
Oh.
They went and visited Ranveer's place as part of the investigation.
So like they're really looking into it.
Talk about intense scrutiny.
Yeah.
Then, of course, there's YouTube itself.
Right.
They removed the episode after a ton of criticism and pressure from the government.
Yeah, it's interesting because this whole thing kind of shows how these platforms have a lot of power,
Yeah.
but they're also under more and more scrutiny.
Right.
And I think this incident really pushed the government to look closer at,
At how these platforms operate.
what kind of content they're allowing.
And it kind of brings up that whole debate about regulation,
Right.
especially for these OTT platforms, which are kind of like
Yeah, it's like the Wild West out there.
the Wild West of entertainment right now.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've kind of set the scene. We've seen how it all blew up. But what happened next?
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking serious accusations here.
Yeah.
Potential legal trouble.
Uh-huh.
How did Ranveer and Samay respond to all this?
Well, good question. Ranveer actually issued a public apology.
Oh, wow.
And, apologies in these situations, they can often feel kind of empty.
Right.
But his actually seemed sincere.
Oh, so he really owned up to it.
He did.
Okay.
He said that his question was inappropriate and not funny at all. He admitted that it was, a lapse in judgment.
Yeah.
And that he didn't want to misuse his platform.
Right.
In fact, he emphasized how committed he is to using his influence responsibly in the future.
Okay, so it seems like a genuine attempt to make amends.
Right.
Especially considering the episode was taken down too.
Exactly.
So I guess the question now is, what happens next?
Yeah, that's the big question.
Like, is this just going to blow over, or are
Yeah.
there going to be, like, lasting consequences?
Well, I think this whole incident has brought the issue of online content regulation into focus.
Oh. Okay.
It's like this case has become a catalyst
Right.
to get everyone to reevaluate the current system.
So you're saying this isn't just about, like, a few YouTubers.
No, no.
This could actually impact how we all experience the internet in the future.
Absolutely.
Wow. Okay.
And it's not even limited to just India governments around the world.
Yeah.
They're all trying to figure out
Yeah.
how to regulate content online.
It's a global thing.
It is, especially as more and more people are getting their entertainment online.
Right.
The challenge is finding that balance, right? Between protecting people from harmful content and also upholding freedom of expression.
Yeah. It's a tough situation.
It is.
So what kind of changes are people talking about specifically?
Okay.
Like, is there a chance we'll see, like, pre-screening of content before it goes live? Like, every video needs government approval.
That's one of the ideas being floated.
Wow.
But it's also the most controversial. I mean, imagine the logistics of trying to pre-screen
It's impossible.
every single video on YouTube.
Yeah.
Not to mention the concerns about censorship.
Right. Yeah.
And, like, who gets to decide what's acceptable?
Exactly. That's a whole other can of worms.
Yeah.
So, I mean, pre-screening might sound like a solution,
Right.
but it seems like a logistical nightmare.
It does.
And then there's also, like, that feeling that it would stifle creativity.
Absolutely.
People are always second-guessing themselves, worried about what they can and can't say.
Exactly.
So it seems like, pre-screening might not be the best option.
Yeah, it comes with a whole host of challenges.
Right. Unintended consequences.
Exactly.
Okay, so what else? What other changes are people talking about?
Well, another area is how people can report content they find offensive.
Okay, so, like, making it easier for people to complain.
Exactly.
Go.
Because right now, these platforms have their systems for handling complaints, but they often get criticized for being slow,
Right.
not transparent, just not very effective.
So the idea is to make those systems more responsive, more transparent, more user-friendly.
Precisely. It's about empowering users.
Right.
Giving them more of a voice.
Got it.
When it comes to content, they find problematic.
That makes way more sense than trying to, like, pre-screen everything.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, but what about the content itself? Is there any talk about changing how things are categorized or rated?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Right now, these platforms mostly rely on self-classification.
So they're kind of grouping their content into different categories based on age.
That's right.
Okay.
But, that relies on the platforms being honest and objective.
Right.
And they are businesses.
Yeah, they're motivated by profits.
Exactly.
Not necessarily, like, ethics.
That's the concern. And a lot of people feel like self-regulation just isn't enough.
Right. There's always that temptation to push the boundaries.
To attract more viewers.
Yeah, get those clicks.
And sometimes that comes at the expense of responsibility.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so what's the alternative?
Well, the government is looking at ways to enforce those age-based classifications more strictly.
Okay.
And maybe even introduce more specific categories.
So, like, more granular control over what different age groups it can access.
Exactly.
So it sounds like they're trying to find a balance between giving these platforms some freedom, but also putting safeguards in place.
Right.
Especially for younger viewers.
You got it.
It's about finding that sweet spot.
Yeah, that middle ground.
Where creative expression can still flourish, but you're not compromising those societal values that we talked about earlier.
Exactly.
Okay, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
But even with, like, stricter categories and better ways to report offensive content, there's still that question of, like, enforcement.
Right.
Who's going to make sure all these rules are actually being followed?
That's where the government's role comes in.
Okay.
Right now, there's a framework
Yeah.
that includes both self-regulation and government oversight.
Right.
But this whole incident has made people question whether that framework is really robust enough.
So you're saying we might see a shift toward more government control over these platforms?
There's definitely a push in that direction.
Okay.
People are talking about giving the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting more power
Right.
to enforce the rules and maybe even penalize platforms that violate them.
Wow. So it sounds like these OTT platforms are in for a lot more scrutiny
Yeah.
and regulation than they're used to.
It's definitely a big change.
I imagine that's making a lot of content creators,
Oh, yeah.
platforms pretty nervous.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot at stake here.
Yeah.
You've got the government's responsibility to protect its citizens,
Right.
especially vulnerable groups, from harmful content.
Okay.
But then you also have the right to freedom of expression.
It's like a lose-lose situation.
It's a tough situation.
Where someone's rights are going to be compromised no matter what.
It's a tough situation.
Okay, so we've talked about stricter content moderation,
Yeah.
better systems for handling complaints, more government oversight. But what about the arguments against all of this?
Well, not everyone is happy about the idea of more regulation. A lot of people are worried about censorship
Right.
and what that could mean for creative freedom.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're a content creator and you're constantly worried about crossing some invisible line,
Right.
you're probably going to be less likely to take risks.
Yeah.
To, push the boundaries, explore those controversial topics that can lead to,
Right.
really interesting and thought-provoking work.
Exactly. And that's really the heart of the debate.
Yeah.
How do you protect people from harm without stifling creativity?
And critical thinking.
And critical thinking, it's a delicate balancing act.
It really is.
And finding the right path forward requires a lot of careful consideration, open dialogue.
So it sounds like a really tough challenge.
It is.
But what about the idea of self-regulation?
Oh,
Couldn't these platforms just take more responsibility for the content they host?
That's a great point.
Yeah.
And a lot of people do advocate for stronger self-regulation as an alternative to government intervention.
Right.
The idea is that platforms could work together, establish clear guidelines, invest in better content moderation systems, be more proactive.
So address harmful content before it becomes a problem.
Exactly.
Okay, that sounds good in theory.
Yeah.
But would it actually work?
That's the big question.
I mean, these platforms are businesses.
Right.
And their main goal is to make money. Would they really prioritize, ethical considerations over their bottom line?
That's the skepticism a lot of people have. It's like, is this just the fox guarding the henhouse? And there is some evidence to support that view.
Oh, really?
Yeah, some of the self-regulatory codes that already exist have been criticized.
For being too vague.
For being too vague, too lenient,
Okay.
ultimately ineffective.
So it sounds like self-regulation, while it's appealing, might not actually be enough.
Yeah, it might not be enough to address these complexities of online content moderation.
So it seems like some level of government involvement is almost inevitable.
Probably.
Okay, so how does all of this fit into the legal framework?
All right.
What about freedom of speech?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And it's where things get really complicated.
Okay.
Because freedom of speech and expression is a fundamental right in India.
Right. It's in the Constitution.
It's enshrined in the Constitution.
Yeah.
So any attempt to regulate online content is going to bump up against this, right?
So the government can't just come in and start censoring things.
Well, they have to be careful. They can't just step on people's fundamental rights.
Exactly. That's why this whole debate is so complex.
It is.
And so important. It's not just about one offensive joke.
Right.
Or one controversial episode.
No.
It's about figuring out how to navigate this uncharted territory, the digital age.
Yeah. How do we balance
Right.
the need for safety and responsibility with that fundamental right to express yourself freely?
It's a tall order.
It is.
And there's no easy answer.
Nope.
Okay, so we've explored the legal stuff, the potential for more regulation, and the arguments for and against stricter oversight.
We've covered a lot.
It's a lot to think about.
It is.
And it leaves us with this big question.
Yeah.
Where do we draw the line?
Where is that line?
It feels like we've been going in circles a little bit.
Yeah.
On one hand, there's the need for responsibility. And on the other hand, there's freedom of expression.
Freedom of expression, yeah.
How do we even begin to find that balance?
It's tricky.
Especially when humor is involved.
Especially with humor, because humor is so subjective.
Right.
What one person finds hilarious, another might find offensive.
Right. And that's always been the case.
It has.
But it feels like what's different now is like the speed and reach of the internet.
Absolutely.
A joke that might have stayed within a small group in the past can now go global in seconds.
That's true.
And that's what makes this whole thing so complex.
It does.
It's not just about being politically correct.
Right.
Or avoiding sensitive topics.
It's about recognizing that words have power.
Exactly.
And that power is magnified online.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important.
It is.
For content creators, influencers, comedians, anyone with a platform.
Yeah, anyone with an audience.
To be mindful of that power.
They have to think about the impact their words can have.
But let's be real. There's no easy answer.
Nope.
No magic formula for figuring out what's okay and what's not.
It's not that simple.
Humor is different in different cultures.
Yeah.
Context matters.
Absolutely.
What might be offensive in one situation could be totally fine in another.
Exactly. So just relying on laws and regulations isn't enough.
Right. It feels like we need a deeper conversation about all of this.
We do.
A more nuanced understanding of, like, freedom of expression, societal values, and how we even communicate online.
I think you've hit the nail on the head.
It's not just about what's legal and illegal.
Yeah.
It's about what's responsible, respectful, and what takes into account the different perspectives and sensitivities that exist in online communities.
It's about fostering a culture of empathy and critical thinking online.
That makes sense.
Humor is great.
Yeah.
It can connect people. It can be social commentary.
But it can also be used to hurt people.
It can reinforce harmful stereotypes.
It's like walking a tightrope.
It is.
Trying to find that balance between freedom and responsibility.
We're all walking that tightrope together. Right.
But I think the most important thing is to keep the conversation going.
Keep talking.
Yeah, keep talking about these issues.
Challenge our own assumptions.
Work towards a digital world that's vibrant and responsible.
Well said. So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a question to think about.
All right.
Where do you think the line should be drawn between comedy and offense?
Especially online.
Especially online.
Good question.
That's a tough one.
It is.
No easy answer.
But it's something we all need to be asking ourselves as we navigate this ever-evolving digital landscape.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.